Hello, good morning. It is a sunshiny day, at least here at Omaha, Nebraska, where I'm at. In late October, we're less than 1 week away from Halloween, which is really fun and exciting. And as it is the last week of the month, that means it is time for our What's Next with Blended Learning live show, which we're getting the opportunity to do on the last Tuesday of every month, starting at 9:30, maybe a little ish this morning. We're about a minute behind here getting things started, but looking forward to a great conversation where we'll get to explore what blended learning means not only just a practice, but also to see some examples of that going on in our state here in Nebraska, to share some work that's being done by some terrific leaders who I'll introduce here in just a moment. But stay tuned as well if you're joining us online live. In the last 10 minutes, we're going to share out tech tools, tips, the latest and greatest things that everyone that is connected with us today has to point others to and towards. So all that being said, I'm going to make some introductions, and we're going to get started talking today a little bit specifically about distance education, virtual learning. There might be a number of terms that you personally use when you're thinking about this conversation, so we'll add some clarity around that today. Thanks to Nick Ziegler, who's at ESU 5. Nick, will you give just a by title introduction?
Sure. I am the coordinator of our distance learning world language program. Currently, we have 7 educators serving 16 school districts across the state.
All right. And then also Wendy Loewenstein, who is with OPS's virtual school. And so, Wendy, will you share a little bit about, the virtual school at OPS?
Okay. Yeah, I'm Wendy Loewenstein. I'm the director of Omaha Virtual School, which is a program within Omaha Public Schools.
Awesome. And Eileen Barks, our good friend, is joining us online. And I, too, am looking forward to learning from Nick and Wendy through today's conversation. So thanks, Eileen, for joining us. And at any point in time, if people want to bring in their comments, questions, we'd invite those. And so I think the first thing that I'd like for us to do is to talk a little bit more about, I know Nick specifically with distance learning, what is it? What does that look like? And then maybe even some misconceptions that people might have. And we'll do the same thing as a follow-up with Wendy when we think about what does it actually look like, the virtual school at OPS from a learner experience. So Nick, why don't you get us started?
Sure. Distance learning, right? And when we think about distance learning, I commonly hear people think about 4 different types of things. One is that idea of a completely asynchronous experience where students are working through maybe some credit recovery courses or working independently through content. There might be some connection to teachers, but it's primarily students working at their own pace through content that is shared in a learning management system like Canvas or some other place. Second is the idea of a direct connection between the teacher and the students. And so that looks like, in our situation, our teachers are in a studio, either here at ESU 5 in Beatrice, Nebraska, or at ESU 3 in Omaha, Papillion. And they have a whiteboard behind them, and it's a one-on-one connection where they can see directly into the classroom and interact in a live experience with the students. That is what we are doing. And there are other opportunities around, like a hybrid experience where there's some degree of connection, teacher-student connection, and also some degree of an independent learning experience. In some situations across the state where distance learning is happening, you have a teacher teaching live in front of a group of students and also teaching remotely to another group of students across in a different classroom, in a different place. So quickly reiterating, in our context, we have single SENs where it's one teacher, one classroom, instead of individual students on that Zoom board, right? It's one teacher, one classroom, and we are connecting every single day to make that live connection.
Yeah, I love that, because I do know that a misconception with that conversation sometimes is exactly what you're talking about. We think back to some of those pandemic learning scenarios where it was this someone sitting on their bed at home under the covers who is tuning in, from the comforts of that surrounding, rather than, as you had mentioned, potentially be in a room of 2 or 5 or 30 students. And so that's a little bit about what is going on with that program that Dr. Ziegler is leading out at ESU 5. Wendy, will you tell us a little bit about OPS Virtual School?
Yeah, so Omaha Virtual School, we started in 2016, so pre-pandemic, and we started as a kindergarten through eighth grade program. And just want to reiterate again, we are a program within Omaha Public Schools. So, uh, you know, we our ultimate goal was to be a kindergarten through 12th grade program. So every single year after our inaugural year, we added a grade level. And our first graduating class was a class of 2020. So how our program works is we are blended in that students come on site at least once per week. We are located at the Omaha Public Schools Central Office Building on 32nd and Cumming. And students come here once a week. The rest of their time is working on their coursework independently at home using the curriculum that was specifically developed for this type of learning environment. And if you really want to get technical, the blending learning model that we implement here at OVS is the enriched virtual model, as identified by the Clayton Christensen Institute. Because we require that in-person time. So.
Terrific. And I would presume that a misconception about the Omaha Virtual School would be that it's entirely virtual. And as you noted there is an in-person component. Can you expound on that just a little bit more to further enhance the clarity around that point?
Yeah, so Omaha Blended Virtual School didn't quite roll off the tongue when we were looking at naming our program. So there you go. So students come on site one day a week. And in addition to that required time, for example, kindergarten through fifth grade has required synchronous online lessons 3 or 4 days during the week. And then for 6th through 12th grade, however, they don't have the required synchronous instruction online on Teams, but they have they have optional online support and some additional in-person support that is an as needed basis for students. But at times we do require those times if we find that a student is struggling with content or proficiency of materials. Does that provide further guidance? I guess I could also add one more thing is like an important piece of our program that's just the backbone of all of the work, kindergarten through 12th grade, is our pacing guides. And the pacing guide essentially outlines the whole semester right out of the gates. So the teachers work to prepare that pacing guide for the semester. And that outlines what every student should be doing every single day in each course. So that provides the structure for students and families, because when the student isn't engaging live with their teacher, that's really the learner's schedule is set between the learner and their learning coach, their parent, who typically is at home with the student, facilitating and ensuring that their learning is occurring every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's a great place for us to start. And I think for those that maybe aren't as familiar with this type of learning experience, it's important for us to be able to visualize kind of what we're talking about, what it looks like, before we really get into the heart of this work. And in the comments box online live here, it is reflecting, I think, that kind of sub set of questions or the narrative that we can maybe grow next in our conversation here. And I'll give you some examples of what we're seeing. And so Eileen Heller has joined us and said these are great opportunities in our state for meeting a variety of student needs, which leads, I think, to the natural question of saying, what needs? What are we hoping to address with this? And so, like Peg Coover just said,
right,
this is addressing teacher shortages. Jody Bauer. Well, actually, I want to go to Eileen's comment here next because it fits the. What a great way to help our small schools have access to a myriad of opportunities to learn when we're talking about distance learning. And so, again, the Omaha Virtual School serves OPS as a district, but I do think that there is likely going to be like some overlapping why between these two programs, and maybe also some contrasting pieces as well. So maybe I'll pivot to Nick now, as it seems like our online community is interested in that piece. let's go ahead and have that chat.
Sure. Excellent. I guess to wrap a bow around what this is and what this is not, neither one of us said that our programs are completely asynchronous. And I think that's important. There has been good research that's been done. There was a meta-analysis that was published maybe 5 years ago suggesting they're investigating differences in achievement outcomes as well as perceptual outcomes around completely asynchronous virtual learning or distance learning versus that enriched virtual model or a synchronous model where there is a teacher that is working directly with the students to ensure that learning progresses versus in-person classroom teaching. And what we found is that the asynchronous model, where students are working completely independently, almost without a teacher directly connected, that is inferior. However, what we're talking about, where it's a distance learning model or an enriched virtual model over at OPS, there is no significant differences between that face-to-face experience and what we are doing. And I think that's really super important to communicate is that this is not inferior to having a face-to-face experience in classrooms. The learning outcomes and the perceptual outcomes are not inferior. It comes down more to the teaching and learning experience, the kinds of activities that happen. Andrew, your question is around need. This past academic year, annually, school districts fill out, it used to be called the tech profile. And so within the tech profile, one of the questions is around need for distance learning. And so I have a bit of a glimpse into that information. 97% of districts in the state of Nebraska use distance learning in some form. 97%. That's a huge number. When we look at the need around specifically world language education, 27% of school districts in our state do not have a world language person on their staff. More than a quarter of school districts. And yes, we're talking more specifically about these rural school districts like the ones that we serve. ESU 5 serves 30% of school districts engaging in distance learning for that Spanish component. That was last year. It might tick up a little bit this next year, but the need is so very much there. And we don't want to put kids into that completely asynchronous experience, especially in a world language environment where you've got to have communication. That's what we're doing. We're trying to facilitate students learning how to communicate in another language. That's really hard when you're just looking at text on a computer screen.
Right. Yeah. And Wendy, what's that make you think of as you kind of juxtapose that with your with the program that's there in OPS?
Well, I agree 100% in that it's the relationship and the role that all parties participate in education. Our program relies heavily on parent or learning coach engagement and relationship with the teachers and our learners. But it's the role of the teacher and the student and how this mode or method of teaching and learning is still very dependent upon the human aspect of teaching and learning. And so really, one of the strengths of our program is that strong partnership between parents and teachers and learners, that we were really able to personalize a learner's experience so we can truly meet them where they are. That is a huge undertaking, and it's intentionality and time and effort on all parties to make sure it works. And we're still learning how to do it. But I definitely agree that asynchronous is a part of it. Students working and learning and managing their education independently is a big part of it, but they can't do it alone successfully. And our program has really been trying to work on and focus on those executive functioning skills required for a learner to succeed in our program, and working on teaching those skills and practicing those skills that regardless of where a student is going after graduation, that will prepare them better for college and career I think, than sometimes a traditional learning environment will, because of the independence that an environment like ours requires.
So this is fun to kind of tease this out. So correct me if I'm not synthesizing this appropriately for what the conversation. But when we were talking about the program with Nick, we're hearing about the educational needs of the present moment, which I set up for, right? But I love to, or Wendy's going with this, that in addition to all the things that Nick shared, if we think about what the learners need as maybe even just the diverse learning experiences and the, as you said, executive functioning skills. Wendy, do you feel that it is fair to, even if we're just going to say assume, I don't know if we have research ready to go at a moment's notice here, but potentially, that remote work and hybrid work have increased dramatically in terms of a workplace experience that is going to be the reality that a number of today's learners step into, maybe lifelong. And there are different nuances to, I think, engaging in those spaces. Do you feel like there's a little bit of the learning that can happen in these spaces prepares folks for that type of workplace collaboration?
Yes, and so that I understand the shift in the future of work and hybrid and remote working as professionals, but also you take a look at continuing education opportunities for college and career that students will experience in the future, whether or not you're in cosmetology, you're a mechanic. There's those opportunities for continuing education that's online as well. So you think of most college campuses at this point, a lot of them are offering hybrid and virtual learning opportunities. So I think there are a lot of avenues that this type of learning environment prepares our students for, and it all comes down to how do we manage and organize our time and prioritize, which is not necessarily developmentally appropriate for teenage students and younger. Their brain is not developed that way. So a part that we've been working on is how can we build that into our program to support our learners, because in the long run, if they don't know the date for an important battle in history, they can figure that out. But can they figure out how to get the work done in a timely manner with quality? And that's, it's good stuff, but
and that's good stuff across the board, right? That those executive functioning skills will help students and serve them well as they move forward. And within the world language content area, one of our 5 standard strands is cognition. And the idea is that we do engage kids in some self-assessments. I mean, this is the language that we've been talking about with blended learning over the past decade in the state of Nebraska, is helping to empower learners. That happens through things like self-assessment, thinking about where I am in relation to what are we going to learn, so that I can then think about where I want to be. How am I going to, for example, show you that I can do these different things, so we've got the goal setting, but we've got to think also about how am I going to get there, and helping then, as Wendy's talking about, helping our students develop those skills that are associated with lifelong learning, self-regulated learning, these higher ideas and concepts that we do need to help our students accomplish these things within our world language standards. That's there, but it's also present throughout our content area standards, that we are helping our students become a bit more independent, engaging them in these types of activities. I think that's a great example, Wendy.
Yeah, and when we're talking about these types of activities, and I want to do a little preface here for our online audience. In about 2 minutes or so, we'll get to our share out. But as a way to kind of put a tie between our conversation about these great programs that are going on in our state and the What's Next with Blended Learning initiative, there is obviously like those obvious ties there, right? If we're going to teach in these leveraging technology in this way, there's an opportunity to use blended best practices to help achieve some of the goals, some of the why maybe that we've talked to here this morning already. And so we'll kind of continue to ping pong back and forth. So I'll start with Wendy. What would you sort of point to as some of those hallmarks of, and you did mention that the blended best practices as OPS has defined those are maybe a little different from what the ESU 5 model or the Blended Learning Initiative within the ESU network model might have advocated for. But yeah, what would you share, I guess, in terms of how those two meet?
Well, first of all, and just looking at the blended practices rubric observation protocol, from ESU 3.3.
Yeah.
Or CC. One thing in our program as a team, we really worked hard to figure out how we're different and how to capitalize on our time with our learners. And when you take a look at that rubric as well, really what we've come to after these 7 years is good teaching and learning practices are good in any environment. Those practices in that rubric are good in every environment. So what we really have come to is good teaching is good teaching. Where our struggle has been is making sure that we are utilizing our time effectively whenever we have the student right there with us, whether or not it's online live or in front of us during our blended time. Is how do we better spend our time with students, and then tying in relationship,
yes,
efficiency and skills, and then also those executive functioning skills, and making sure that we are planning with intention. And so it's good teaching is good teaching, regardless of the mode, but making sure that we're intentional is important. And that's also the same thing in a traditional classroom environment. You know what
completely
I'm saying?
agree. Yes. And coming back to those relationships, I mean, we have to facilitate, we have to promote teacher-student relationships. And in our context, it's a group of kids in a classroom and a teacher is on a TV screen. So how do you give independent or individualized feedback in that context where everybody can hear what the teacher is saying? And so we have to also think a little bit outside of the box in relation to maybe, for example, opening up a Google Doc and sharing it directly with the student so that they can live chat back and forth. It's saved and it's there. Looking back at that rubric in relation to what we're trying to do, trying to differentiate the content so that we are giving students some ability for a choice in how are they practicing, for example, trying to give them some degree of voice and how are they showing us what they know in relation to the products that the students might create. We really do want to leverage those best practices, be it blended learning best practices, be it effective educator from our Department of Education best practices. These are best practices. So the mode of delivery, an enriched virtual experience where you're coming together for 1 day a week and then a little bit more independent learning throughout the week, or in our context where we too have played with that enriched virtual model where we would have 2 days of direct teacher connect and 1 day of more independent learning. And so building our curriculum around the concept that students can work semi-independently 1 day a week off of choice boards and the like. But coming back and underlining that idea of relationships. Another big push from our program is to get physically present out to the school districts to meet face-to-face, to have a little bit of that time directly with the kiddos to help facilitate that relationship building.
Yeah, I love that commonality that there is the potential for that to happen in both of these models, for the face-to-face piece to be there. I do have to say, I got the opportunity a year ago to go and watch, observe in a couple of distance learning classrooms across our state. And one moment that struck me was when 3 high school basketball players I watched go to class early, walk up to the screen and have a little small group hang out, chat with their virtual teacher. Was really spoke to the fact that those relationships, though this is a little different, right? Kind of hard to have that one-on-one, completely private conversation, but that those still matter. Students gravitate towards that, and great teachers, to Wendy's earlier point, can make those connections in different ways.
I think we can also give our teachers, Wendy, a little bit of props. I think it requires a master teacher to do this well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the biggest thing that I mentioned too, is continuing to work on that paradigm shift of education and a teacher's role in general has to occur in a traditional learning environment, but especially in our learning environment. We are not the sage on the stage.
Right.
We are facilitators of learning, and that shift is huge and essential.
Ooh, can I add learning experience designer too? I love thinking about it that way a little bit as well, along with facilitating those once designed. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pivot to our next segment for today, which is going to be something that we do each and every time that we host the What's Next with Blended Learning live show, and that is an opportunity for us to ask, what's new with you? So we want to make space so that when we do connect in our live show, that new ideas, tech tools, tips, tricks, recommendations, apps, etc., can be shared out in this format. And so we invite folks that are joining us live to share. If you are actually watching this recording later, still add things in. We'll still see it in the comments and it'll alert us. But Nick, Wendy, is there anything at the moment that you would point folks to kind of in that quick hitters category, I guess, for some things that you might recommend people check out?
Quick hitter for me. All right, ready? Vocabulary is important. In a language, you need to know the vocabulary. And certainly we want to learn vocabulary within context, but research suggests that we need to see a new word about 16 different times before we're going to be able to remember it well. So we love Pear Deck Flashcard Factory, where we can enter in a sentence. For example, the cup is on the table, and so the target word might be the table. And so we have context. The cup is on the table. But now with Pear Deck Flashcard Factory, students will then illustrate, and so it's a check for understanding. They'll illustrate, create their own flashcards. Students are put into groups of 2 different groups, but you have a partner. And then, so after students are done creating their flashcards, you actually get to vote on which one. Look at the production phase right now. My kids love this. But what I love about it even further, if it goes down there, it doesn't tell you. It will then send your flashcards to GimKit. And now students can practice the vocabulary, the flashcards that they have created as a class inside of GimKit, which is also, we don't pay for many tools in our program for our educators to have access to, but man, do kids love GimKit. That gamified practice.
Cool.
So there's one. Wendy, you're up.
Well, I didn't send this over to you beforehand, but one of our focus for our school improvement plan for the ethic of care is socio-emotional learning, of course, but check-ins through the strategy of doing check-ins with students. And so we use Microsoft Teams as our online synchronous platform, and Microsoft Reflect is built into Teams, which it is just a really fun way to do an SEL check-in with students, mostly K-5, but our middle school likes it too. There's little monsters where can identify with feelings. So during those online synchronous lessons that our K-5 do, this is tied into Microsoft Teams, and the kids love it. So much so that when the students are on site, they want to do the same check-in with their little monsters. So really quick, easy way for an SEL check-in with our students. And that's something that those check-ins are quick but mighty in the feedback and input that we get from our students that we're working on as a team to be able to respond to that input from students throughout the lesson and the day.
Love that. On a similar note, Wendy, and I wasn't planning on sharing this, but I've been in chat with a company called Lesson Loop that has, I think, kind of similar ambitions. They're trying to put together some really engaging ways to load a Google form, essentially, like to ask a survey, but to make it fun and have characters. And they do some presets in there for SEL. They kind of have question sets that come with it, and so that's something that's on the rise too. So that's really cool to see those the consistency that there are efforts out there being made in those spaces. So thanks for sharing that one. Wheel of Names, free online tool to create digital spinners. So if you're looking for some pickers, then Jody Bauer is going to point you in that direction, which is great. There's the SEL check-ins. Very helpful in building relationships with students. And
Megan is one of my teachers, and she is the one of them that's really using that Microsoft Reflect.
That's awesome. And the check-ins obviously are great for relationships and building connections. And Jody here with another one, the Energizer Wheel with exercises, some would you rather questions, and a whole lot more. So well, I would encourage everyone to continue to post if you have new ideas or as you go through the next month between now and on November 29th, when we get the opportunity to come back for another episode of What's Next with Blended Learning. Think about, what things you come across we might be able to share in this format. But I certainly want to take a moment here before we bring things to a close to thank Nick Ziegler at ESU 5 and Wendy Loewenstein at OPS's virtual school for all of your just time efforts in your day-to-day, and then also taking a little bit of time with us to share that out and help us think a little bit. I think, one, we learned today what's going on in Nebraska, and a lot of great things in that virtual space. And then two, that blended learning is an essential piece of that, but that good teaching, like Wendy said, is good teaching. And as Nick and Wendy both reiterated, relationships are at the heart of all of it. And so thank you so much for your time. And we'll look forward to seeing everyone in about a month on the 29th of November at 9:30 a.m. Central for our next episode of What's Next with Blended Learning.